are affected by ACEs in children. All of these are connected to each other because you don't just do one thing in one area of your brain. It's kind of all interconnected, and it's hard to differentiate where certain things happen, and certain things happen in multiple areas of the brain. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to kind of just run through it really quickly. So we start with the right half of the brain, the right hemisphere, and this is typically in charge of emotions, your reception of other people's emotions, your reactions and communicating your emotions, as well as processing how you're feeling personally, controlling your emotional reactions, and regulating your emotions when it comes to what happens around you. This is also where you get into self-control. And for the rest of the brain areas that we're going to talk about, it's typically more so the right side of the brain, particularly in the limbic system, that we see these problems that occur or differences that we see. They're typically on the right side, but not always. So next we're going to talk about the cerebral cortex, and the cerebral cortex is like the higher functions of the brain, right up in here. It was the last part of the brain to develop, and this is what helps people to differentiate between really subtle stimuli. So like if you're in a social situation and somebody smiles at you, are they smiling in a way that's like, they just smile a little bit and they're not genuinely smiling at you? Or is their smile bigger and they're actually pleased to see you? You see the little creases in the eyes that tell you they're actually smiling. This is the part that helps you differentiate between really subtle things like that. It also helps with impulse control and problem solving. For example, we can solve more complex problems than chimpanzees, for example, because we have a larger cerebral cortex. Also, it helps us develop our own self-concept, so an idea of ourself unconnected to other people, or connected to them, but mainly it's how we see ourselves individually and related to the world. Also, it helps us to pick up on social emotional cues and learn about social emotional situations and how to behave, as well as make future predictions based off of what we already know. This is the cerebral cortex helps us to be like, oh, hey, that didn't work. Maybe I should do this. Or, I should really start saving for retirement at 22 because when I'm 60, it's going to make my life a lot easier. Those type of things. And we also need to take into account the midbrain, which is not as big of a concern. We don't see this popping up in the literature as often because it controls spatial awareness, motor coordination, and motor function. So your awareness of your body in space and how well you can control your body, and like if you can catch a ball, or you try and kick a soccer ball, if you're going to hit it and it's going to go where you want it to go. We don't see as many problems with these type of things, but we do see problems with them sometimes when people with ACEs. But the main area that I'm going to focus on is the limbic system, because that is where a lot of the problems occur. So the limbic system, that is comprised of the amygdala, the autonomic nervous system, which is the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems, the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, as well as a couple other smaller structures. And so in general, this helps us derive personal significance. So when something happens or we learn a bit of information, it helps us relate it to ourselves, which is very important for learning, because that personal significance is what makes us remember something. And remember, when you're learning, that application stage of how can I apply this, personal significance comes into play a lot. On top of this, it helps us learn from our emotional reactions to things, and use those things to guide our behavior. For example, if your friend says something rude about you in public, typically your limbic system would be like, hey, that wasn't cool, let's not hang out with that person as much. It also helps you to organize new learning. So it helps you figure out where to put it, how to make those connections and those matches with old bits of information, old memories, and things like that. It also helps you to adapt to new environments. And typically what we do as human beings in a new environment is we look around, we see what other people are doing, we pick up on those social cues, and we adapt to fit in, which is You could debate whether or not that's a good thing. Typically it helps us survive though, so it's helpful in new situations. And now we're going to talk about the amygdala, because this plays a really huge part in people with ACEs. The amygdala controls your fight, flight, or freeze response. It also controls aggression, fear, and sexual responses. But mainly we're going to focus on the fight, flight, freeze part, because that's the layman's terms and it's the easiest way to talk about it. So fight is obviously there's a threat coming at you, you're going to punch it in the face or pick up something and fight it. Flight is there's a threat coming towards you, you are going to run or get out of there as fast as you can, and typically we hear about these a lot. We don't hear about freeze as much, but this is becoming more and more common. The freeze response is when you see deers caught in a headlight, that's the freeze response. It's, oh no, don't let them notice me. Don't make a noise, don't make a sound. If you're quiet enough, they won't see you. That instinctual childhood response when there might be a monster under your bed, to just stay quiet and they won't find you, like you're playing hide and seek. That's what that is. The amygdala is also really tied into the autonomic nervous system, which is part of the central nervous system that goes through your whole body. Mainly the sympathetic nervous system is what we're going to talk about, because that helps your body physically prepare for the fight, flight, or freeze reactions. It releases epinephrine, which gets your body ready. It's adrenaline. So you're ready to either run or stop or fight something. It gives you the extra boost to do whatever you need to do in a given situation. Oh, and something else about the fight, flight, freeze response that I wanted to cover is that people don't just have one. It's kind of situation dependent, and people do tend to favor one sometimes, but you're not stuck with just one reaction, which makes sense. If you are faced with a tiger, you're probably going to want to run or hide from it. You're probably not going to want to fight it if you don't have something to fight it. However, if you're faced with, I don't know, a cat coming at you, that's a different response. You could maybe grab it, put it in the bathroom or something like that. So it kind of depends. But back to the sympathetic nervous system, that's going to get that adrenaline flowing. It's going to make it really hard to sit still, to breathe normally. Your heart rate's going to go really fast. Your breathing's ready. You might start shaking. Some people cry when they have a lot of adrenaline pumping through them. These are really normal responses, and they're really helpful when you're in an actual life or death situation. The parasympathetic nervous system, it kicks in typically after the sympathetic nervous system, and it helps to calm everything down. It wants you to save energy. It can also be responsible for disassociation, but typically when it's used healthily by your body and your brain, it just helps calm you down. It slows down your heart rate, it slows down your breathing, it helps you preserve your energy. And then we need to talk also about the hippocampus, which is a big one for learning because it's the memory storage system. Pretty much all of your memories they're finding pass through the hippocampus, even if this is not where they stay, pretty much all of them go through there. So the hippocampus plays a huge part in memory regulation, which is a large part of learning. On top of this, it controls what goes from short-term memory into long-term memory. So short-term memory is what it sounds like. You hold on to it for a little bit. And long-term memory you hold on to for much longer. It becomes a part of your stored knowledge banks, which is typically what you want if you're going to learn something. And it's important to hold on to it beyond just the test that you're going to take to make sure that you were paying attention. We also see children and people with ACEs give an enhanced estimate of danger in any given situation, which relates to what I was talking about before. They're just more likely to assume that they are in danger, which makes a lot of sense. But they're also more likely to display behavioral control problems because they don't have the same, systems in their brain set up. They don't have the same right brain limbic system responses in place. And basically, when they get to this level of hyperarousal, it is very difficult for them to practice emotional regulation and bring themselves back down. And this is where the behavior problems can come in schools, because they might get afraid out of nowhere, but then they don't have the tools to lower that fear. They don't have the tools to talk themselves through it, talk themselves down, or even if they try and talk themselves down, sometimes it just doesn't work. So they have a lot of problems in this, and it can lead to a lot of problems learning and remembering things, because they're in this state of, my life is in imminent danger. Your brain does not prioritize memorizing fractions or something like that. It prioritizes detecting threats, and they're more likely to detect threats in the environment than people without ACEs. People with ACEs also have a lot of trouble organizing and categorizing experiences, and this can cause problems in what we were talking about earlier in learning, in that the integration of memory and the matching of the new input with old input doesn't always happen. And something I forgot to mention earlier is that this enhanced threat detection means that typically when teachers are teaching, sometimes the student does not pick up on what the teacher is trying to convey. The stimulus that the teacher is trying to give the student might not be what they are receiving. And this actually goes for any teaching situation. You can't be guaranteed that your students are picking up what you want them to pick up from however you're teaching them. But this is particularly prevalent in people with ACEs. As far as hypoarousal, we see a lot of the same cognitive difficulties as far as memory, but typically it comes with a flat affect, meaning there is less emotional response, and it can come with disassociation, which is kind of just pulling away, feeling like you are disembodied from your experience. And so this is kind of a different way of coping for people who have been traumatized at home. This is kind of more of a behavioral freeze response. If you are not noticed, you're in less danger.